Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Christiana Manpour in London. Does the world now have a duty to intervene? That is the big question. After a blistering new report says that China bears responsibility for genocide against the Uyghurs. Dozens of global independent experts in human rights, war crimes, and international law are behind this landmark report on the Muslim minority group there. The first of its kind analysis found that Beijing violated every single provision of the UN's Genocide Convention. As many as 2 million people have been forcibly detained, facing atrocities including sexual assault, forced sterilization, torture, and death. The report's conclusion: China's policies amount to, quote, an intent to destroy the Uyghurs as a group in whole or in substantial part. Beijing strongly denies the claims of human rights abuses, calling them the lie of the century. In a moment, we'll speak to one of the report's contributors. But first, correspondent Ivan Watson talked to Uyghur women who were released finally and fled China after suffering horrific abuse in government-run camps.
The traumatized survivor of a 9-month nightmare. Tursunay Ziyawadun, a refugee from China's Xinjiang region, describes the torture and rape she says she endured during detention in a Chinese internment camp.
How is your health today after your experience in the camps?
I was in a lot of pain and suffered bleeding. After I arrived in the US, I had to undergo surgery and my uterus was removed. I've suffered a lot of damage.
Tursunay is an ethnic Uyghur. In March 2018, she says police in Xinjiang detained her at a so-called vocational training center for women.
Because I lived in Kazakhstan for 5 years, they wanted me to confess to say I was influenced by American propaganda and foreign organizations.
During one interrogation, Tursunay says guards beat and kicked her till she blacked out. In the camp, Tursunay says authorities began forcibly implanting female detainees with contraceptive IUDs. After a botched procedure led to bleeding, she says she was taken into a room.
There were 3 guards. They inserted a stun baton inside me and twisted and shocked me with it. I passed out.
On a separate occasion, she says guards wearing masks once again took her from her cell.
In the next room, I had another girl crying and screaming. I saw about 5 men going into that room. I thought they were torturing her. But then I was gang raped. After that, I realized what they also did to her.
Tursunay first revealed these claims in an interview with the BBC. The Chinese government did not answer our questions about the women named in this report, but Beijing did vehemently deny any human rights abuses in Xinjiang.
There has never been such a thing as systematic sexual abuse and mistreatment against women. China is a country ruled by law.
Why are you here?
There's strict state censorship in Xinjiang, and police followed and harassed CNN journalists when they last visited.
The women all had their hair shaved off. They wore gray uniforms with orange vests and printed numbers on them.
For 28 years, Kelbinur Siddiq worked as an elementary school teacher. In 2017, she says she was ordered to teach Mandarin at an internment camp holding thousands of women. Speaking from relative safety in the Netherlands, Kelbinur says on her first day of work in the camp, she witnessed a disturbing sight.
2 soldiers were carrying a Uyghur girl out on a stretcher. There was no spark of life on her face. Later, a female police officer told me the girl died on her way to the hospital due to heavy bleeding.
Although Kelbinur did not know the cause of the woman's death, she says later that same female police officer told her male guards routinely gang raped detainees at the camp. The officer also told her,
when they drank at night, policemen told each other how they raped and tortured girls.
In previous reporting on China's mass internment policy in Xinjiang, CNN heard testimony from Gulbahar Jalilova, a citizen of Kazakhstan, who alleges that she endured sexual assault from a guard during prolonged detention in Xinjiang. CNN cannot independently verify the accounts of these women. China has attacked their credibility, calling these women actors playing victims from Xinjiang.
The Chinese government says no women are abused in the camps. What do you say to the Chinese government?
I am a 43-year-old woman. Do you think this is something I can be proud of sharing with the whole world? I would tell them that I'm not afraid of them anymore, because they already killed my soul.
Ivan Watson reporting their terrible stories. And David Sheffer served as the first U.S. ambassador at large for war crimes during the Clinton administration. And he's joining me along with Uyghur activist Johar Ilham, whose own father is serving a life sentence in China. Welcome to you both. Let me first ask you, David Sheffer, from your perspective as a former ambassador at large on these issues and having worked on this report, what is the most significant thing about this report? Does it have enforcement provisions? What do you hope to come of it?
The most significant part of it, Christian, is that it demonstrates that the government of China is actually orchestrating acts of genocide against the Uyghurs and Kazakhs and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang. That is a very important finding, because in other genocides, it's not always literally the government that is always focused on the genocidal acts. But here, this is a massive governmental bureaucracy. When you put all of the pieces together, that bureaucratic effort demonstrates genocide. And as far as what, the significance of that, is that there is a genocide convention, and China is a ratified party of it since 1983, and it has the duty to prevent or punish acts of genocide. It is not doing that. In fact, it is perpetrating genocide. So other nations are going to have to step forward and respond to that.
Okay, so Ambassador Sheffer, tell me one or two of the main pieces of evidence that lead you to be able to conclude that it is the state and nothing but the state which is responsible for this genocide.
Well, as our report demonstrates, there's actually a significant number of documents, public statements, actions by government officials at the highest possible level, what they've said, what they've ordered, that has been compiled and can demonstrate that intent, namely to eliminate the existence of the Uyghur minority group, which is about 11 million people in China. Now, eliminate doesn't mean kill them all. That's the classic understanding of genocide. The Genocide Convention is far more sophisticated in the sense that its intent is to ensure that a protected group, in this case an ethnic group, with also religious characteristics, can survive as that group. And if you undertake actions such as sexual violence, detentions, forced labor, killing leaders off of the group, or imprisoning them, for the rest of their lives, you're sucking the blood out of that group. And you're also, the children are being shipped away to other, orphanages, state-run orphanages, and away from their culture and their families. It's a very systematic, it's incredibly organized as to how do you go about eliminating the existence of a protected group like the Uyghurs under the Genocide Convention without necessarily killing them all. Well, the Chinese have figured out how to do it, and they are doing it.
Well, one of those who is in China and under a life sentence is one of the intellectual leaders of the Uyghur movement, and that is the father of our guest, Johar Ilham. Johar, when you read the results and the conclusion of this report, you see that it's public, people are talking about it, it's going to go to governments. What do you hope this will do?
I really do hope more and more governments can recognize this. What the Chinese government is doing to the Uyghur people is an act of genocide. It is crime against humanity. there are world-recognized organizations, human rights groups, and news outlets like BBC and Vice had reported on this and had acknowledged this as crimes against humanity. But the Chinese government is still denying it, and I do hope the Chinese government can finally recognize their own mistakes and live up and act on this and start changing their behaviors, release all the innocent people who are currently locked up, including my father and my cousin who is serving in prison right now.
Have you any contact with them? I think they've been inside for a good 8 years or more. What do you know about their condition, about their state of being right now?
Due to the fact that I can't go back to China, without putting myself at risk, I have not been able to visit my father in prison, and he was arrested in 2014, and the day before he was detained was the last time I spoke to him. And since 2017, family visits are no longer allowed, so nobody from my family were able to visit him, and we don't know what's his current condition. We don't know if he is even alive.
Must be so awful and so worrying for you and so many families who don't know what's happened to their loved ones and can't get to them, and certainly there's no due process. David Sheffer, what does this report and its blatant statement of laying the blame at the foot of the state, what does it mean for governments like the United States, which has already called it genocide? What does it mean for other parliaments that are trying to get that resolution through their legislatures? What are you calling for? I mean, is it military intervention? Is that even a starter against China?
Well, that would be fairly implausible, but I must say that it is up to largely parliaments in countries around the world to take the initiative on this. The Canadian and the Dutch parliaments have done so. The British Parliament has been very focused on this issue. In other words, to at least shame the Chinese government with their own statements or determinations relating to both crimes against humanity and genocide in China. But many other actions can be taken, with respect to how governments interact with China. There's the trading relationship, which is always extremely sensitive. But I've wondered why not require, it might require legislative action, but why not require that if the product is coming from the forced labor regions of China where the Uyghurs are, that there be a labeling on that product, a warning, this comes from forced labor in China. Or this is made in the genocidal nation of China. I mean, those are simple things to require in order to import the products into your country. Another initiative, particularly in the United States, there's already on the books the Genocide Accountability Act, so that any Chinese official who is involved in this, who enters the United States in the future, could be held criminally responsible under the Genocide Accountability Act. Congress could take the large initiative and pass the Crimes Against Humanity Act, which we've been trying to do for years, and therefore any Chinese official who meets even the standards for crimes against humanity against the Uyghurs would be subject to criminal liability in the United States. And there are so many other initiatives that one could relate, whether it's World Bank financing, how we deal with the Olympics in Beijing. There are many things to do to try to convince the Chinese government to change course, to shame them. And that's part of our obligation of prevention and punishment under the Genocide Convention.
I just wonder whether there is any shaming to be done of China. In other words, are they shameable? You remember that because of Darfur and other such things back in the early 2000s, they called the Beijing Olympics in 2008 the Genocide Olympics. And there was a big call to boycott, and it just didn't happen. I mean, it was a great big fizzler. And I'm just wondering, what you really think would actually affect the Chinese government. So far, I've told you, the foreign ministry, the government have called this the big lie of the century. Chinese foreign minister yesterday says the claim that there is genocide in Xinjiang couldn't be more preposterous. It is just a rumor fabricated with ulterior motives and a lie through and through. And he adds that the Uyghur population has more than doubled over the last 4 decades, that Xinjiang's economy has grown by more than 200 times. Life expectancy there has expanded dramatically. They just deny it, and they don't want to hear anything from you or anybody outside.
And I don't care that they don't care. In other words, I would say we need to call them out, particularly at the leadership level of governments, for the big lie, because they do propagate the big lie. So first of all, at the diplomatic level, they need to be called out repeatedly, consistently, and not just temporarily. And then, all sorts of actions can be taken which identify whether they are speaking the truth or are misrepresenting the situation. I mean, I would ask them, okay, take the documents that we identify and the statements that we identify in our report, take them one by one, and either deny that they exist or were ever said, or reject them. In other words, overcome them with a statement of compliance with international law. I mean, yes, it's a tough pull, but at some point, the Chinese government has to be directly confronted with human rights issues.
And many U.S. administrations have tried, but this is really important now, because the U.S. government is calling this genocide, and as you've said, that does call for a response under international law. Can I just ask you, Johar, there are terrible and shocking statistics, and our correspondent Ivan Watson has also reported on this, about forced sterilization amongst Uyghur women. And some of the reports saying that there's a dramatic drop in the Uyghur birth rate, down 33% between 2017 and 2018. What do you know about that? And why do you think China has decided to conduct this full-scale assault on 11 million of its people?
The Chinese government has never admitted that there's single human rights abuses, including the forced sterilization or any sexual abuses that have been happening in those camps. But there's no human rights abuses. They never admitted that there was human rights abuses in Tibet, in Inner Mongolia, in Hong Kong, in Tiananmen Square, and they don't admit that thousands of human rights lawyers and Christians have been, and political prisoners, including my father, have been being put in prisons. They have never admitted in the past, and I don't see them admitting now. I have personally interviewed a few camp survivors on my personal advocacy work. I'm currently assisting on a documentary film on the Uyghur issues, and I do. For a fact, I know these are all happening. Just to address my personal experience, I grew up having my personal human rights being abused by the Chinese government officials. Growing up, I was put under house arrest multiple times, along with my father. Growing up, I had bugging devices in my apartment. Growing up, we were being followed everywhere, even to shopping malls. My cousin was arrested for having my father's photo and his article in her cell phone, just on her way to a shopping mall. And these are all happening, and the Chinese government should no longer deny that any of these, with those mounting evidence presented, and they should no longer deny that these are happening. And I really do hope that international community can continue push on this issue and continue pay attention to this issue, and also governments can enforce legislations that actually work, and that can actually prevent this from keep happening.
All right. Well, Johar, Ilham, and David Sheffer, you really have brought this right to the front and center. You're making a lot of noise. And of course, we will continue to keep our focus on it. David Sheffer, Johar, Ilham, thank you both very much for joining us. And now we turn to a dynamic young woman whose extraordinary rise in the business world began with all too common obstacles. Whitney Wolfhard is the 31-year-old founder and CEO of Bumble, the buzzy dating app where women take the lead. Only they can send the first message, and Bumble's board members are also majority female. Last month, Whitney Wolfe became the youngest woman to take a major American company public, and her son was there for the historic moment. Here's our conversation about dating, love, and success in the age of COVID. Whitney Wolfe, welcome to the program.
We're going to go back in what they was discussing pertaining to the human rights abuses that's going on. I wish that they had some sort of pictures that they could have drawn to the viewer to be able to connect in regards to seeing the camps and seeing some of the abusiveness that's going on with the women that's being raped and the genocide. Whenever we think of what's going on over in Syria pertaining to the war with Russia, and I think the Saudi Arabias are involved in it. Whenever we think of how that the Saudi Arabian people don't allow women to have a say-so, they have to remain covered. They cut off hands. They cut off arms in trying to pursue or enact their laws over in that area. Whenever we get to looking at the Zulus and the tribal disputes over in Africa, we think, my God, how come the world in areas are still as cold and as barbaric and as uncivilized and heathenistic as they've ever been today as what they was back years ago? The sad thing about it is, because of the internet, we can now take time in recognizing these things that are occurring. Maybe not necessarily in our own backyard, but on down the road, we can identify that these type of actions are bad, are incorrect. Some people may think, well, this is just a process towards population control. If there's going to be any population control pertaining to minimizing the population, that should be handed in the hands of God and God alone towards what happens to that particular region, that particular continent, that particular culture, that particular area, regardless whether it comes in the form of a disease or a natural catastrophe such as an earthquake or a volcano eruption. At no time should anybody have the right to genocide human beings, such as the Europeans didn't just try to do, but did do to the Native American Indians right here in the United States of America. And to this day, the powerful and the rich over here in America still would like to restrain certain people from doing certain things by keeping them under their cuff. But at the same time, we have learned in the Western culture that these things are considered unhumane. Unhumane that other countries still to this day practice and are a part of. It is truly sad whenever a country such as Japan turns upon to its own citizens to the point of watching genocide happen right in front of our very eyes. It's very sad, and it really touches a very, very soft spot in my particular heart because of what happened to the Native American Indians here in America, pertaining to me myself having part Indian in my blood. It really touches a very, very strong area in regards to my religious sense of the Jewish Holocaust that took place during the rising of Hitler, that basically all forms of nations, or most all, come up against during that time towards saying what Hitler was doing was wrong. I don't know what it's going to take to turn these governments around to the point that they're going to be willing to understand that regardless of your name, regardless of your family history, regardless of where you come from, you have the inevitable right to not only protect yourself, but to protect your loved ones from the oncoming events pertaining to genocide, as we watch the black race, as well as other races here in America, be discriminated against. It's really sad, especially whenever we should have made further advancements years ago that would have ended this type of abuse in regards towards human rights. I've said before, and I'll say again, I was treated unfairly here in the United States pertaining to how the church world, the so-called church world, basically left me out to dry. The so-called church world basically stood me up. And they made things very, very difficult in the founder of the Windmill Ministries' lives, hoping that I would give up on this quest, hoping that they would destroy my soul and my spirit. And they come awful close of doing so. I'm not going to lie. They come awful close of doing so. But thank God that God kept me alive, kept my spirit alive, kept my soul alive. And to this day, I'm still striving towards and for the same things that I was striving towards and for 30 plus years ago. Even though I'm not as young, even though I'm not as strong, even though I may not be as sharp as one time that I was, I'm still holding dear to the promises or the covenants coming from the King James Version Bible, that according to the Bible, there will be a pouring out of God's Holy Spirit that will re-revolutionize the world, not just here in America, but throughout the world, pertaining to a revival. I'm still hanging on to that vision or those dreams that God planted in my heart and in my mind, going all the way back to 1983. And the reason why I say this is because I know that my Lord and Savior is taking care of me and is taking care of other people that has been embarked upon. So as we get further into this in understanding how these abusiveness procedures happen throughout the world, understand this. And I have said this before. If what that I had done pertaining to bringing enlightenment towards what went on with the Davidians in 1993 and what went on with the Waco incident in 1995, 2 years later, if I would have been in any other country, they would have already destroyed me, not just emotionally, not just spiritually, but they would have done already. They would have done already.
Front and center, you're making a lot of noise.
Drawed blood to the point of having me basically taken out. Similar towards how that the competition over in Russia right now, how that they have imprisoned an individual over there because Putin don't like his stance, and they're basically trying to destroy that individual because that individual believes in human rights. I don't know what it's going to take. I just know this, that according to the Bible, God will move upon to these people and up onto these nations and up onto these countries, to the point that, yes, not only do they deserve to be shamed, not only do they deserve to be ridiculed, but they deserve to be condemned in this type of brutality. And let's not never forget that pertaining to the great United States of America, because without her, the freedoms, not just here in America, but throughout the world, would not exist if it was not for her, pertaining to the USA. I want to thank you for allowing for me to speak. Once more, I'm fortunate to be in America, because if I wasn't, I'm pretty sure I would have had great toll suffering, more so than what I've already been through. The only thing I know to do for these particular people and those that get a hold of this message is to pray for them. Pray, because it talks about how that Satan will take you and take us and throw us into prison, that we will be tried for 10 days, to be thou faithful unto death. And he who shall overcometh will not be hurt of the second or the final death. Thanks again for listening. God bless, and good luck to each and every one of us. Thank you. Goodbye.